2009 Wharton India Economic Forum, titled India, The Road Ahead, took place in Philadelphia and brought together CEOs of leading Indian companies, investors, heads of non-profit organizations, sports celebrities, and Bollywood stars to discuss where India is headed in an age of economic uncertainty. Indian Knowledge at Wharton brings you one-on-one conversations with these leaders.
Thanks for joining us today. Could you tell us how the pharmaceutical industry in India has changed since the early 90s when there was the wave of liberalization for corporations in general there?
Well, thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me here. Well, first of all, I don't think the liberalization had a direct impact on the pharmaceutical industry. However, I think there has been an indirect impact in the sense that liberalization has brought in greater economic prosperity, and that has in turn driven demand for quality healthcare. And so I think that's driven the growth in the pharmaceutical industry, if you like. The second piece indirectly done is liberalization has also created an interest in India in general that focused the attention on the R&D capabilities in India, and therefore has attracted the attention of the global innovative companies.
And tell us about that R&D capability. Are we talking about the clinical study capability? Is it the research capability, the scientific knowledge that's available?
Well, it's actually all, because if you really see the development of the generic industry really demonstrated a very significant chemistry capability. But that was not the first point of contact, because the first point of contact came from the fact that the global pharma companies needed to reduce costs of bringing a molecule to market. And the largest piece in that is clinical R&D. You have a large patient pool in India, and which is also treatment naive. So I think the first place where companies went in was clinical R&D. Then, having understood the infrastructure, the capabilities of the country, different companies have taken different routes. Some have gone to chemistry, some have gone to early discovery. So there are different routes that people have taken.
So there seems to be a big difference between what a foreign company wants to do within India and what the domestic companies want to do in terms of exporting generics or building a global business outside of India. Could you talk about that difference, please?
Yes. You see, I think up until 2005, we had a patent law which was different from the rest of the world. We had a process patent law. Now, everybody knew that post-2005, we would have a patent law which was like most other countries in the world, which is product patent. Now, that necessitated that the Indian companies look for avenues for growth beyond what the model they'd been following earlier. And I think as a result of that, a lot of them went out and expanded the generic business globally. And so that's been the route the generic companies have taken.
Could you just explain how that change in the patent law would drive Indian companies to look beyond borders?
Well, I think up until 2005, Indian companies could replicate or reverse engineer a product which was on patent elsewhere in the world, and they would get a process patent for it. So it was not a product patent, it was a process patent. Post-2005, it's a product patent. Now, therefore, Indian companies cannot use that as a basis for growth. And therefore, they needed to look for other growth drivers. Global, expanding the generic footprint globally was one such opportunity which companies have taken. Now, as far as innovative companies are concerned, it's the reverse, that they suddenly now begin to see India as a very attractive opportunity, apart from the fact that the traditional markets are not growing as fast, and therefore there is a general focus on emerging markets and healthcare. Within that, India, because now it's compliant with the international patent law, has become very attractive. So companies which were not playing in the Indian market, global companies, are now there is a rush to come back.
So India offers certain low-cost advantages when it comes to performing clinical trials, for example. What about outsourcing other kinds of R&D, actually creating new molecules and that kind of activity? What's the future for that?
Yeah, that activity is also picked up fairly substantially. As I was mentioning in the discussion, up until 2005, the model for growth of Indian companies was quite different. Now, there are different compartments. So actually, post-2005, in the last 4 years itself, we've seen a very substantial increase in the number of patents being filed globally by Indian companies, the amount of work that they're doing to bring the first Indian molecule to market.
How does your company fit into this picture? Because your company, Glaxo, has been in India much longer than most foreign pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
And so I would imagine you have different strategies that you're pursuing from some of the others.
Yeah, that's true. Now, I think we're seen almost like an Indian company. So that's a plus in the Indian market. The success of the Indian model has actually, led our new CEO to try and replicate that in a clutch of markets, which is now called the emerging markets, which he thinks are going to drive growth for GSK globally. And really what they're trying to do is to build a branded generics portfolio apart from our own pipeline in emerging markets, because that's the kind of model which works. And the inspiration for that has come from the success of GSK in India, because GSK in India developed a business model which was India specific many years ago. So they moved manufacturing to India. Therefore, they could price the product appropriately, and which is why they've been able to develop such a substantial footprint in the country. And that's the model now they're trying to replicate elsewhere.
What about some other activities for India's pharma companies? For example, apart from drugs going off patent and generics and the things we've just discussed, what about personalized genomics-based medicine?
Biotech is I'll come to genomics, but biotech certainly is one which I think some companies have pursued big time. And there was a belief that once the guidelines for follow-on biologics get into place both in Europe and the US, then that would be a big opportunity. Some companies have gone that route. Genomic-based medicine, there are some initial beginnings by people who've come back from other parts of the world and have started operations in India. But my guess is biotech will develop faster than genomics-based medicine.
What about prevention of sickness?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think we, like the generic pharmaceutical industry, I think India also now is beginning to show signs of a fairly well-developed vaccine industry. So there are a number of local vaccine companies who are doing extremely well. We're now able to, provide product to UNICEF and the other Gavi and the others. So certainly, I think on the vaccine side, there's a fair degree of activity. Prevention of sickness generally, I think, requires dissemination of good practices, good hygiene, and all of which is work which is being done either by government agencies under the National Rural Health Mission or by NGOs advocating safe practices. So I think there is work in that area on as well. And I think that's getting demonstrated in the continued decline in some of our mortality rates and improvement in our healthcare statistics.
What kind of changes do you see in the regulatory structure going forward?
Yeah.
Any further big loosenings?
Yeah, I think first of all, yeah, sure. I think India so far has had a almost like a dichotomy as far as regulatory structure is concerned. So you had a state level regulatory structure and then you had a national regulatory structure. What is being envisaged is an FDA type of structure, which will then encompass not just drug approval, but also pharmacovigilance, also monitoring of trials, all activities surrounded or associated with drug development and launch of new products. So I think in the next couple of years, we are going to see that kind of a structure come into play. And I think then we will have a regulatory system which is comparable to the best in the world.
India has had a lot of small manufacturers which will be facing some difficulties in meeting the new scrutiny that's going on in manufacturing in India. Do you have any plans to work with some of those small companies to help bring them along, collaborate? What is your level of collaboration with India companies at this point?
Yeah, well, about 45-50% of our current product portfolio is outsourced to contract manufacturers. So we're already working with a fairly large number of not small but medium-sized players whose manufacturing practices we've upgraded to meet with our standards of quality. So I think we've been doing it not just now, we've been doing it for many years.
What are the key things that Indian companies need to do to move to the next level of serving worldwide markets? 2 or 3 key things.
Well, I think they're already serving worldwide markets.
Yeah.
I really don't think it's more in terms of doing key things. I think it's more in the sense of now focusing on the right therapeutic areas, focusing on the right opportunities so that they find these international forays profitable enough to be sustainable.
There's big changes coming in the U.S. in healthcare. We don't know what they are, but we all know that they're coming. How will that affect the export of, say, generics from India? What are the opportunities there?
Well, I think the changes would largely be governed by two things, if I read the tea leaves. One is that, A, the cost of healthcare is prohibitive in the US. It's very expensive. So, I want to bring it down. And secondly, you want to make it available to those who don't have access today. And if those be the considerations, then I have no doubts that Indian generic players will have a significant opportunity because of the cost of manufacture and the quality at which, the cost and quality combination that they're able to deliver.
Does that mean you would be more interested in perhaps taking over some smaller companies so that you increase your manufacturing base to be able to deliver more to the U.S.?
No, I think being a global company, we have our own subsidiary in the U.S. serving the U.S. market. So I don't think that is the intent or will be the intent. But there is a stated intent of going into branded generics in the emerging markets, and if that requires that we go and acquire either somebody who can do it for us, then yes. But otherwise, not as a source for manufacturing GSK products and sending them elsewhere. No, that's not the intent.
Okay, so in addition to changes in the U.S. healthcare system, the other big thing that you're probably working with is the worldwide economic downturn. Now, healthcare tends to be resistant to downturns. They tend to not be as affected as much. But can you speak to how your company is being affected in India and elsewhere by the worldwide downturn?
No, I can talk about India. So far in India, not just our company, the market, we haven't seen any impact. Last year, the market grew at 10%, which is in line with what was expected. Given the level of penetration of healthcare in India, I don't think that we may not see an acceleration of this growth rate, but I would be surprised if the growth sort of drops below this.
Are there specific disease categories or other categories where you see big opportunities opening up, whether there's going to be more insurance money available or whether there's just a push to solve the problems with particular diseases?
It's well known that Indians are particularly susceptible to cardiovascular diseases and diabetes. So these two are slated to become the biggest healthcare problem for India. And then associated with diabetes, you've got the other problems of end organ failure and all of that. So I think in that whole area, we're going to have some challenges. And this is something, it's not an opportunity, but I think it's something which the government is working on, and we need to work on to make sure that there is enough awareness about Indians being susceptible to this and doing something about it.
And India has long been known as having an advantage when it comes to low cost, and now everyone's concerned about the high cost of healthcare, particularly in the U.S., but it's becoming a big concern worldwide. How can you leverage India's reputation as a low-cost producer to increase market share?
Well, first of all, when you say India is low cost, it's in relation to the West. I mean, if you look at cost of healthcare in India, in relation to India, it's been going up fairly substantially. So that's not good news for Indians. But having said that, I think the fact that there is economic growth, the fact that insurance is opening up, health insurance is opening up, is resulting in a substantial increase in demand for quality healthcare. So you're seeing a number of tertiary care hospitals, which are world-class, which are coming up. Now, all of these can also provide services to the itinerant medical care seeker. So medical tourism is expected to grow fairly substantially over the next several years. And I hope that the capacity build also happens concurrently, so that just doesn't mean that there's a cost arbitrage, but the cost of healthcare for Indians goes up.